So I said earlier this year I was going to do more pre-built stuff because I know a lot of people are in a position where they just want to buy a computer, turn it on, have a warranty, and off it goes. So up today is NZXT's new Player 3 system. It's actually a part of their 6 different systems they have available. They have Player 1, 2, and 3, and then Player 1, 2, and 3 Prime, which is pretty unique. So let's go ahead and talk about a company that started making cases that's now making full builds, and let's see exactly what this one they sent us has in store. So once again, a huge thanks to NZXT for sending us this unit to look at. So first and foremost, this is the Player 3. Like I mentioned, there are technically 3 different tiers, Player 1, 2, and 3, and then there's a Player 1 PC, Player 1 Prime PC, and then there's Prime for 2 and Prime for 3. So basically you can go in here and make some modifications to the initial parts that are on there. There are some components that you can sort of switch around to kind of play with some of the cost. But each one of those particular Player 1, 2, and 3 tiers have a particular use case in mind. So Player 1, for instance, would be the entry-level PC. It's the person that wants to get into playing PC, but not cost a fortune to get into it, to make sure that you're not overspending and to have something available within your budget. Player 2 bumps it up to like 1440p gaming, also gives you the ability to have enough power to like live stream, while playing games at the same time, whether it be on Twitch or YouTube or whatever it is. Now Player 3, that's their top of the line. That is 4K gaming at high settings. That is full content creation. That's like 1080p or higher, 60 FPS live streaming while playing games without even really noticing you're taking any sort of a performance hit to your system. It's more memory, more storage, faster CPUs. So that's kind of what they sent us here. To be honest, a lot of the brands like to send us their top tier stuff, but I think when we look at mid tier and low tier, that's important too. So I would probably keep an eye out in the future while we look at some of these pre-builds that are also at more that entry level componentry, because that is where most people are going to probably start their journey. So I think that's important. Anyway, since we have the Player 3 in front of us, let's go ahead and talk about some of the specs. So this particular Play 3 is in an H7 Flow case, which means it has got a huge amount of ventilation on the front. The porosity on this is like 70% or something crazy, where the holes in the front have a ton of airflow. And the top of the case has the same perforation that's on the front, so giving it plenty of airflow for, in this case, our 280 AIO, which is in here. This is, of course, an NZXT AIO. This also has an LCD screen inside the pump. It's like a little mini center panel. It's a pretty high resolution screen too. You can do animations on there, GIFs. You can have it show system information, animations, all kinds of neat stuff. You can see in this particular unit, it's 64 gigs of RAM of T-Force Vulkan. What's interesting about this though is that they're using 4 sticks of RAM. So we're gonna see in the BIOS, I'm curious what the BIOS settings are with 4 sticks of RAM. This is a 13900KF. That means that there is no iGPU in the CPU, but it's giving us all the overclock ability and all of the speed that comes with the 13900K. Anyway, it is running an MSI Z790 motherboard. It does have 2 terabytes PCIe Gen 4, and we're running a NVIDIA Gigabyte GeForce RTX 4080 Super. So as you can see, this is definitely a system that's gonna be more than capable of running 4K games at high settings, especially with DLSS 3 and all those, and frame generation and all these other technologies that exist in RTX cards, depending on the title and the latency or maybe input lag. That can come with frame generation. You can see a significant improvement in your FPS, but if you turn that off because you're doing competitive gaming of some sort, you still have enough horsepower to be able to push high FPS without any of that frame lag. One thing I think is kind of interesting though, is you'll notice that they're using the basic fans that come with the H7 Flow. That means we have one 120 millimeter intake fan on the front. Now we do have two 140 millimeter exhaust fans on the AIO, which is gonna have a little bit of restriction going through the radiator, so that's gonna slow down some of the airflow, and a 120 exhaust. So that means we're gonna be in a negative pressure situation with this case. All that means is that we're gonna be pulling air in through the ventilation, other than just the intake fans. I would have liked to have seen at the price point that the Player 3 exists, NZXT to populate this case with more fans, because I don't think it's a bad thing to have more airflow. But because of the fact that the ventilation is all in the front, we can expect pretty much all of the air to come in through the front, not necessarily through the crevices and stuff on the sides. If I take the front off, you can see it is filtered. So what that means is, there we go, get off there. That means any of that dust that's coming through where there's not a fan will still be filtered in that negative flow situation. But I do think they should populate at least one more intake fan, but having 3 on the front would be nice. Now, because it is a standard type of chassis, that means there's no fans on the back motherboard wall. So this isn't one of those double wide compartments where you have fans coming in the side as well as the front. So we just have a straight linear flow of air going through this case. Now, when we talk about the back side, it is a solid panel. A lot of the flow cases, especially like the H9 flow, which is that wider kind of a layout, have one, like the entire back panel would look like this. Now that would be another place that air can get pulled in that negative airflow situation. But this is a solid chassis panel in the back, which is why I said all that airflow will be coming in from the front. But now we need to take a look at their cable management, which overall looks pretty good. So the H7 case obviously gives plenty of channels here for them to hide wires and kind of keep things nice and tidy. In terms of the power supply, it is an MSI power supply actually. It's an A750GL PCIe Gen 5, so that means it's using a native 12 volt high power plug or the 12 volt 6x2 or whatever they're calling it now. I'm not sure exactly which one it is. It's kind of hard to tell by just looking at it, by the way, but I digress. You can see there's no SATA drives in here because it is all NVMe storage in this particular build. So here's the controller that comes with the case up here. This is where your fans can be plugged into, so you can, or lighting can be plugged into as well, so you can control fan speeds and lights. Other than that, it's a pretty basic build. It's off-the-shelf type of parts, assembled by a team that's been assembling PCs for a long time. It does come with a 2-year comprehensive warranty, so it's going to include 2 years parts and labor. So if you have any issues that pop up, they do have a support line that you can call for assistance, and then obviously, depending on the type of assistance you need, they'll work it out with the warranty department to be able to get you up and running again, or parts changed and or RMA'd. So 2 years is nice because a lot of SIs only offer 1 year. They only offer 1 year on, usually it might be 2 years on parts, 1 year on like actual support. So it's kind of weird there, but they're offering 2 years parts and labor. Not sure what else there is to say about it. It's a pretty basic build, nothing too crazy here. And I think the nice thing about SI, to be honest, it stands for System Integrator. If you're not aware, it means it's a company that's building PCs to sell. It is a great place to start if you want to get into the PC hobby, but you're too afraid of putting it together yourself. Because guess what? After that 2 years is up, and this system will last longer than 2 years in terms of relevancy, you now have a platform to play with. It means you can now learn how to change your graphics card, or upgrade your memory, or upgrade your CPU, or add more storage, or change your cooling. So it's a perfect platform for you to start messing around on. And if only there were channels out there that existed to teach you how to do a lot of those basics. Anyway, speaking of basics, let's get this over here to the monitor. Let's get it turned on. Let's see what it sounds like. Let's see what the profiles are like out of the settings or out of the box. It is going to be using NZXT Cam, I can tell you that much, because of the cooler itself. And then I'm curious as to what the BIOS settings look like. So the nice thing about these being all basically off-the-shelf parts, and the fact that the Windows key is DRM to the motherboard though, is the fact that it's all out-of-the-box BIOS. So what that means is you can go in here and do any of the tuning stuff we've talked about. It's not going to void your warranty with the brand. That's important, because one of the nice things about having a K SKU is being able to play around with overclocking or undervolting or whatever you want to do. Now I mentioned the fact that they have 4 6 of RAM in here. Look at this. It's at 4,000 megahertz. It's actually below the 4,800 megahertz like base clock of DDR5, and that's because anyone that knows having 4 sticks of RAM in either AMD or Intel these days puts an extreme stress on the memory controller, which means you have to really relax the mega transfers per second to actually get it to be stable. So XMP is disabled. Profile 1 would put it all the way up to 5,200 megahertz. Now, at least they're not running super fast RAM. And what I mean by that is if you paid for like 6,000 DIMMs and they're running at 4,000 megahertz, that's 33% less performance in terms of speed of the RAM that you paid for. Now, this is where it's important to really kind of think about what's most important as you're speccing your system. Would you want more storage or more capacity of RAM, excuse me, not storage, more capacity of RAM at a slower speed because whatever programs you're using, say like Premiere, Photoshop, it doesn't care about how fast your RAM is. It just cares about how much RAM is available to it to store all of those previews and all those effects and stuff in. The speed of the RAM makes no difference. Games, however, can suffer with slower RAM. We've showed this in the past. Now, DDR5 is extremely fast, but if you're only gaming, you're not planning on doing content creation, video editing, Photoshop, or anything like that, or any sort of 3D modeling that needs lots and lots of RAM, then you could get away with running 2 sticks. You could still get 64 gigs of RAM if you wanted. You'd run 2 32 gig sticks at that point, which is easier on the memory controller without having all A1, A2, B1, and B2 channels filled. meaning that you could have faster RAM, which would be more beneficial for games. So it seems like with the Player 3 build, they decided to go on the side of content creator, giving us 4 sticks of RAM. Now, right now I've just enabled XMP. I wanna see if it'll boot. Now, it doesn't mean it's gonna be stable, even if it does boot, because these systems do go through a stability QC, and the fact that it's lower than 4800 tells me it's probably not gonna post, which means they've already gone through this test. So one thing I'd be able to do if I technically wanted would be take out 2 sticks of RAM, then enable XMP, and it would work just fine. But as you can see right now, we have a yellow light that is on, and I bet you anything that is actually the memory light. There we go, look at that. It's going right into Windows. Let's see what it boots at. I'm wondering now, maybe that was just training. If it actually booted at 5200, we're in a gray area here. I understand NZXT wanted to slow down the RAM for stability. But as a more power kind of guy, I want all the power. So anyway, it did boot all 4 sticks at 5200. I think if I wanted to, what I would probably do is I'd probably go in the BIOS and slow it down to like 5000. Just relax it a little bit. But as you can see, all 4 sticks of RAM did post. Now that's a discussion you could actually have with support if you wanted. And then they'd be able to tell you like, hey, here's what we think is safe, here's what's not safe. And by safe, I mean stable. I don't mean like your system's gonna die or the RAM's gonna go bad or anything like that. It's just you might get another post. I'm gonna shut it down. You might get another post that doesn't necessarily start up. So I'm gonna check that right now. I'm gonna shut it down, let it power off, and I'm gonna power it back on and see what happens. Okay, well, with that said, let's go ahead now and let everything finish up. I'm gonna close off OneDrive. I'm gonna run Cinebench right now because I wanna see where it's landing. It should land pretty, right around, I'm gonna guess 37,862. 37,862, let's see. So it's showing 4.9 because that's averaging E cores and P cores. So it's not a very fair assessment, but look at the temps, 68. 40,036. Okay, I was way off. That thing has got a 40,000 at 68 degrees on an AIO. So our core package temps, I wanna see if they match that. 73, 82. That says 70. Okay, so clearly we have some discrepancy here because really the package is at 82. That makes a lot more sense. Our cores are in the 70s. Package is at 262. It was at 291 for a second there, and then it dropped to the 253, which is kind of where it would end up going. But our frequencies are at 5.5 gigahertz all core on the P cores. All right, so let's talk performance. It should be pretty straightforward. It should land pretty much exactly where a 4080 Super would land. This is a gigabyte version. It is not like a Super OC type of model. In fact, its highest frequency we saw it get up to was 2760, which is pretty much standard for the 4080 Supers and whatnot. You could go into Afterburner, have a little bit of extra power limit available to you even on this model. If you wanted, you can try and overclock it and get more performance. But I find that there becomes a point where the tweaking and tuning you do for a couple FPS isn't even worth it. But anyway, let's talk performance. So 3D Mark Port Royal gave us a score of 17,978. Now that by itself might just tell you like, okay, great, that's the score. I'm only telling you that so you can see how it compares to your system if you have one. That's landing exactly where 4080 Super should land. So there's nothing crazy there. When it comes to F123, which we're using right here, 1080p gave 167 average FPS with no DLSS. I turned off DLSS because we just wanted to see how it compares to our other graphics card that we run without DLSS. 1440p gave us 120 FPS without DLSS once again, and 4K gave us 66. So it cut in half with 4K versus 1440p. So what I'm gonna see right now, so we got 66 FPS in 4K. I'm gonna come up here, I'm gonna turn DLSS back on and see what kind of performance we gain. So we at least maintain that magic 66 FPS number that we minimum, like that's the minimum amount of flare that we will accept with a PC. So we need to see if we can get that over 100 now, because I think 120 is quickly turning into the newest minimum for most people. Everything's on the highest settings that we can possibly get, so I wanna point that out. So if we go to video mode, now quality would give us the sharpest image, but that would still give us a bump in performance over no DLSS. So I would still take a quality DLSS if you're like, I want the sharpest image. But I'm gonna go balanced because I find that the difference between balanced and quality is kind of hard to see unless you're pixel peeping side by side. Wow, by going NVIDIA DLSS on balanced actually, we went up to 120 average FPS. Now I'm gonna start the test one more time just so that you guys can see that there's literally, like, you really can't tell that this is any sort of a upscaling. And because we're starting in 4K, it's such, I mean, look how sharp this is. This is extremely sharp. And so, yeah, there's no fuzzy, there's no artifacting. That's awesome. It just shows how DLSS is an awesome feature when it works well. But anyway, so you can see we doubled our FPS nearly anyway, from 66 FPS to 120. Let's see what happens now when we go into Cyberpunk. So we had gotten 53 FPS in Cyberpunk 4K, 1440 was 119 FPS, and 1080p was 161. So clearly the 1440p and 1080p numbers are great. The 4K really tanks on most of these titles, which is just the way it is. But I want to point out there was no ray tracing on with that. So what I'm doing is I'm running the same test, which was basically the ultra settings, or I can't remember what the highest settings are, but I've turned on DLSS, I've turned on frame gen right here, and then DLSS at balanced. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna sort of look together right now to see whether or not it looks all fuzzy and gross. But I wanna see what our FPS comes up to from 53, because 53, in my opinion, is not playable on a system like this. But Cyberpunk, at this point, it really is like a playable benchmark, if you will. It's like Crysis. It's a very difficult title to run. But look at the FPS right there. 118, 124. But looking at this right now, you would have a very hard time discerning this from non-DLSS. Now, obviously we don't have ray tracing going, so you didn't see any of the reflections going in there. But if I were to turn on ray tracing right now, we would probably drop down into about the 80, maybe 75, 80. But even with frame gen on, it might still hit 100. But now we're talking a very playable FPS. 111, 116, 115, and this is the built-in benchmark. The game tends to be a little bit lower on FPS. 120.83 from 53. So here, I'm gonna turn on ray tracing now, because now I wanna know. Ray tracing on, do ray trace reflections, do ray trace shadows, local shadows, sure. Ray trace lighting, sure, medium. Path tracing, nah, path tracing photo mode. All right, here we go. Dude, it looks so much better in the shadows. There's 103.56 with ray tracing on this time, and at medium for lighting. So there you go. But that's only half the story. How did our GPU perform in here with a single fan on the intake and then having 3 exhaust fans? Well, I can feel warm air coming out of here, that's for dang sure. Hotspot never exceeded 81, and on average, our GPU core never passed 67. It's already back down to 38C right now. And our clock speed was at 2760. So obviously that fluctuated because that's showing the max clock it reached, and that's the max that VBIOS will allow for that particular GPU, unless you go in and overclock it. So there you go. If you're looking for a system and you're just like, I want to be up and running within a few days of buying it, not have to worry about building it and stuff. Look, for me, I'm the builder. I love building computers. Building computers for me is the game. Gaming is secondary to building the computers. There are those out there that are the opposite of me. Building the computer is a bothersome. They don't want to deal with that. That's just, it's a task they're not interested in. They just want the benefit of having the computer. That's why companies like NZXT's player systems are perfect for people that fall into that category. But because there's nothing bespoke, nothing custom, nothing that only works with their systems, you could easily upgrade, modify, change out parts as time goes on, as needed. Anyway, there you go, guys. Once again, a huge thanks to NZXT for sending us the Player 3 system to take a look at here. I'll put all the links down in the description below if you guys want to go and kind of play with their configurator to see how the cost breakdown is, how the performance in games looks, and to see which parts you can modify per level of system, whether it be Player 1, Player 2, or Player 3. But I'm gonna go ahead and get on out of here. This is where you guys tend to have a pretty strong discussion about SI versus build your own. And I know that you guys have already drawn a line in the ground and you're just like, I'm on this side or that side. So at that point, go ahead and just fight it out.
Round 1, fight.